The start of my musical journey was when I started learning Western classical music on the violin from Mrs. Rama Chaube. As time flew by, I completed 5 years, and that's when a new journey started alongside. I started learning Dhrupad, the oldest form of Indian classical music. One day on Guru Purnima, we attended my Guruji's private mehfil, and that's when I could connect. I realized that something changed in me. As he sung, I knew those powerful notes. It was magical. I could associate it to Western classical, and that's when I knew that I had to know. I needed to know how and why I could relate two absolutely different styles of music. And therefore, I dived into the history of Dhrupad and Western classical. Both have evolved about 2000 years ago from the Indo-European language systems. Dhrupad being from the Samveda, which is in Sanskrit, and Western classical originating from Greek and Latin. Both have the same roots, the same starting point. Now let's talk about Dhrupad. Dhrupad was sung as temple music originally, where social gatherings and cultural events took place. The Mughal Emperor Akbar and King Mansingh Tomar brought this art form to their courts and patronized it, wherein this period was called the Golden Era of Dhrupad. Musicians like Swami Haridas, Baiju Bavra, and Mia Tansen popularized it. This is when the well-known Khayal Gayaki evolved as an offshoot of Dhrupad. But Dhrupad, however, remained in its original, purest form. Taking the lineage of Dhrupad forward are masteros like Dagar Bandhu, Gundeja Bandhu, and Pandit Uday Pawarkar, my guru. Let me give you a glimpse of Rag Bhairav, my favorite raga from Dhrupad. Narayana Hari Tuma Narayana Hari Tumahi Karatar Jagahi Karatar Jagapalana Har Narayana Hari Tuma Narayana Hari Tuma Narayan Hari Tuma Narayan Hari Tuma Narayana Hari Tuma Narayan Hari Tuma. This is the format which has been practiced for centuries, and can you believe it? It is still the same. Moving on to Western classical. Western classical is divided into eras like early music, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, and at present, modern. Let me explain a few of these with live demonstrations. Baroque in the 1600s was when sheet music started being used. The piano forte, or the piano as we know it today, was invented. The famous Stradivarius violins were made in this time. Iconic composers in this era were Vivaldi, Bach, and Handel. Let me play for you Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. Next was the classical era, where instruments were standardized into strings, wind, and percussion. The best composers of this time were Mozart, Beethoven, and Paganini. Let me play for you Mozart's crazy famous piece, Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Romantic era, pieces started having longer introductions and dramatic codas or endings. The basic idea of a solo performer came into being. Top composers of this time were Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake is what I'm going to play. And the top composers of this time were Tchaikovsky, Sibelius, and Mendelssohn. So let me play you Swan Lake. We are in the modern era. The music at present is the modern music. The top composers of today are John Williams and Hans Zimmer, who also give music to Hollywood. Here is Pirates of the Caribbean by Hans Zimmer. Looking at the chronology, we can very well see that the Western classical music evolved and bloomed through various styles of representations. However, Dhrupad has not experienced many changes. Its original structure is still intact, still in its purest form. As I explore more, here are some similarities that I find as a student of both these styles. Firstly, both have set formats. Dhrupad has a set format, usually sung in 4 parts: the Asthai, Antara, Sanchari, and Abhog. The Western classical pieces are also divided into various parts, like Adagio, Allegro, Largo, Presto, Moderato, and so many more. Secondly, ragas and scales. Dhrupad has ragas, and Western classical has scales and keys. I find similarities between these as well. For example, the Bhairav Raga from Dhrupad and the harmonic minor from Western classical are quite similar. Here's Rag Bhairav. And here's the harmonic minor. Thirdly, duets. Duets are very popular in both these styles. This is when different music is played or sung by 2 people at the same time, complementing each other. And my last similarity is that Varna from Dhrupad and one of the pieces that I recently learned, perpetual motion from Western classical, are something I find quite similar. Now, what is Varna? So Varna are basically words. For example, ara na na ra na num na te ta ra na na. And let's increase the tempo. Ra na 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 ra na 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 ra na 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 ra na ara na na ara na na ra na 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 ra na ara na na ra na na ra ara na na ra na na ra na ra na 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 ra na na ra na na. And now let me play this on the violin, perpetual motion. And here's why now I love both the styles of music, as I can connect them to each other. The way Western classical has been preserved and popularized, it is our responsibility to preserve, conserve, popularize, and expand the horizons of Dhrupad, as it's a privilege to have such a beautiful form of music embedded in our culture. Because we all know great privileges come with greater responsibilities. Thank you.